Computer. Okay, cool. So for doing a spray paint stencil, so in theory, you would be doing this to complement your woodcut print, right? So what I just did was I took my woodcut print proof over to the window and I laid my printing paper over it and I traced it. And so, can you guys see this?
Yeah.
So it's kind of like a guideline where I'm going to cut away. Now, I'm going to be putting spray paint on top of this. I'm going to be doing it pink, but by doing that, I'm going to use red. I'm just going to do a very light coating because I'm actually going to be laying the spray paint on top of some of the ink. All right. The flip side of that would be if I were using pink spray paint, then I might cover up some of my ink. So in that case, it would be better to do the spray paint first and then print my block on top of the spray paint after it dries. Do you understand the difference?
Yeah.
So you can get a color through 100% opacity coverage of a pigment that's pink, or through, say, 20 to 50% opacity coverage of a darker pigment, but through like a dot pattern, through like a stippling coverage. And more of the white paper is showing through. So it's kind of the similarity of using like a black spray paint to make gray versus a gray spray paint to make gray, if you want to think about it that way. So we're down here in my printmaking layer, and I've started cutting the stencil a little bit already. So there's a couple of things to consider as you're cutting your stencil. Like for example, this area right here, instead of working all the way around, like imagine if I were to walk on a trail, I would walk the trail from beginning to end. But instead of working all the way around one side to the other, I'm going to kind of work equally and evenly around the piece, if that makes sense. The other thing I should mention is actually, and I forgot to do that because I got excited, is I actually like to cut slightly outside of the spray area. So to compensate for the thickness of the paper, because the spray will go not quite up to the edge of your paper because of the height of the paper. Does that make sense? So the spray will go almost up to the edge of the paper, but sometimes it might not go all the way up to the edge of the paper. So whenever I'm spraying, it's similar to in screen printing. There's a technique called trapping that helps for registration purposes, where in trapping, instead of having two layers sit side by side, you have the layers slightly overlap each other so that you don't end up with little white lines of paper visible between your layers. So it makes registration easier. So by cutting just outside of the edge, sort of compensating for the thickness of your paper, it allows the spray paint to have that trapping effect. When I'm cutting like two cuts that are side by side, let's see if I can get this any closer to the camera. Can you guys see that a little bit better now?
Yeah.
Okay. Is this better or worse?
That's better.
Okay. So if I'm cutting, can you see what I'm doing?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So if I am cutting, say, this cut number 1 and then this cut number 2, if I make this first cut and then I make this second cut, can you see what I'm doing?
Yeah.
If I pull away from this, sometimes what can happen is it can cause this paper to curl because it's pulling away from an area that's already been cut. So like if I cut from here to here, I'm cutting from an area that has not been cut, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what I would do instead of cutting from here to here is flip my paper around 180 degrees and cut from here to here.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I'm going to cut and see how I have a curve here?
Mm-hmm.
Instead of turning my knife, I'm going to turn my paper. Because if I cut and turn my knife, it's going to cause my blade to break.
Mm-hmm.
But if I cut and rotate my paper, my blade is going to be less likely to break. Do you guys need me to go over that again?
No, I think I got it.
Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and cut there. Rotate my paper. I'm always cutting towards my body. Okay. So cutting towards that and then cutting towards the area that is going to be cut and released, right? Cutting on the outside. And if at any point you can't see what I'm doing, tell me, okay?
Okay.
And so I'm not going to cut this way. I'm going to wait. And so another thing I can do is instead of starting there, I'm going to leave a space. Can you see the space that I left?
Yeah.
I'm going to leave a little space there. And so that little space will leave a little structural point, and I can go back and cut that when I'm done. I can do the same thing here. Leave a little space there. Leave that space, and then I can go through at the end and just pop it out. So those are other things I can do. So like here, same thing, but I can just as easily flip it around, go back. Now watch, I'm going to show you. You see how it's curling up?
Yeah.
So stuff like that can happen. Okay. So those are things to watch for. Okay. Okay, we're back. So I just finished cutting my stencil, and I'll hold it up here with the it looks hilarious because of the little teeth. So you can kind of see it with the print there. So again, here's the print, here's the stencil. And so we're gonna go outside and then we're gonna spray the stencil. So I wanted to show you guys, and I apologize if you can hear the background noise. I'm gonna put the spray paint stencil over this, but then I was also gonna show you how you can also just use textures as well. So this is just like yarn that's cut up. This is just a little paper doily. I think it might actually be 3 paper doilies. And I've also got some spray adhesive. So hopefully my spray adhesive.
Oh, now I can hear it.
Good times. So I'm gonna put a little bit of spray adhesive on the back of there. Try not to use too much because if you're gonna be putting it onto your print or your printing paper, you know what I mean? You also wanna let that dry before you put it on there. So I'm gonna set that over there and I'll do the textures first. So, you know, if you're doing something like this, I'll put this a touch on there. If you're doing spray paint stencils, you know, and printing your block over that, it doesn't necessarily have to align with your printed image. So I could totally print my wood block over this as a foundation. You know, you can definitely play around with that. And so when I spray the spray paint, I'm not gonna try to point downward. I want to try to hold it, you know, vertically or close to a 45. I don't want to try for like a super heavy coverage necessarily. You see how I'm getting some drips right now? Just a couple. And so the spray adhesive helps to keep you from getting what's called underspray, where the spray paint, can you guys see that okay?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where the spray paint will sneak up under the stencil.
Well, that's cool.
And I just got paper down on my deck to keep my deck from getting paint all over it. It's just cardboard and paper. And my paper is covered in red paint because I've been painting my grill. I don't know if you can see my grill in the background. The little shelves on the side of my grill, I've been painting red. So I like sanded them down and I'm repainting them. So I'm going to actually move this over here so I can put this on a flat surface. And then I'm going to position my stencil here. And again, I'm not going for full coverage here. Just going for like a 50% coverage. It's not too windy right now, which is great. And so what I like to do is, so let's say my end game is to get a 50% red coverage that would translate as pink, right? So I'm going to spray it in this direction, then rotate my paper. Or I'm not gonna rotate my paper. I'm gonna rotate myself. Spray it again. So I have not covered it 50%. I'm gonna move my body. Because what'll happen is, you know how I was saying to cut the stencil slightly bigger than you want it, like about the thickness of the paper bigger? Because if the spray paint is going up and over the edge of the paper, it won't hit that little space where it's jumping over the edge of the paper. And like right here, there's a little bit of a halo there. So by spraying, by spraying in this direction, it's getting that little nook of a space that the paper was blocking when I was originally spraying in this direction. So I'm pretty happy with that coverage. And can you guys see me taking the stencil off?
A
Yeah.
little bit.
Okay. Here, I'll bring it closer to the camera so you can see the magic happen. Can you see it now?
Yeah.
Ooh.
Ooh, fun.
Can you guys see it now?
Uh-huh.
So yeah. So there it is. Little dolly sheep. Little bit more pink, a little more red than pink, but still okay, not awful. You know, good time spray paint stencil situation. So again, you can do this as the first layer. You can do it as the second layer. You can use the spray paint to intentionally cover your ink so that when you have your finished piece, you would essentially have 3 different printed layers. So you'd have your printed ink layer, your spray paint layer, and then your third layer, which is the color created by the ink and your spray paint overlapping. So